This is Talk Easy. I'm Sam Fragoso. Welcome to the show. Today, in celebration of 30 years of This American Life, Ira Glass. Ira co-founded the weekly public radio show for WBEZ Chicago back in 1995. And through 3 decades, it's essentially remained faithful to what The New Yorker has lovingly described as Glass's 3-act structures, chatty cadences, and mixture of analysis and whimsy that feels so familiar now as to seem unremarkable. And it's true, across 850 episodes and 9 Peabody Awards, This American Life has become such a staple of, American life that it's hard to remember a time in radio without it. It has the feeling of just kind of always being there. In part because A, at nearly 30 years, it sort of has, and B, because of how many other shows Ira has either inspired or produced. Serial, S-Town, The Trojan Horse Affair. It's hard to imagine The Daily from the New York Times or any of the pieces of audio journalism you enjoy without Ira Glass. And so today, in New York City, Ira and I talk 3 decades of This American Life. The highs and lows of putting out new work every Sunday, the rigorous editorial process that makes what you hear possible and pleasurable, and naturally, what he sees as the future of the show. We also tell some of Ira's story as a child magician turned precocious intern at NPR, his formative years working under engineer Keith Talbot, and how he learned slowly to tell stories on the radio. And don't worry, we'll play passages from some of his best work and some of his worst work, just to be fair. And of course, because it's Mother's Day, we couldn't help but talk about the people responsible for us being here. I can't speak for Ira entirely, although I have a pretty good idea, but I don't think I'd be doing the kind of work I'm doing now without the influence of my mother. The conversations we shared growing up in Chicago, the ones we've had on this very program, and the one I better have before she hears this episode. And so with that, happy Mother's Day to you and yours. And here, after many, many years in the making, is Ira Glass. So you are familiar with the show then?
I mean, when we first discussed me coming on, I did look up the show, and then
that was just 8 years ago.
That was, I know, and so at that point I did. I thought like, seems pretty good, but now I honestly will be completely honest and say, like, I really don't remember what the premise of the show is at all. I understood that you wanted to interview me, and I thought like, seems like I remember that show seemed good. Sure.
Well, welcome to the program. It's nice to have you here.
What is the premise of the show?
Well, we'll get into that. How are you doing?
I mean, it's good. It's like a little hectic for me right now because of there's a bunch of reporting I'm doing and flying around to do that. And I'm about to marry somebody who's working in Hungary. So every now and then I'm going to Hungary to see her.
She's directing a movie?
She is directing a TV show, actually. Mm-hmm.
And is hectic good for you?
It has good and bad. Like some days I feel like I'm on a treadmill. And then some days it's really interesting.
This is probably not how you spend most of your Monday mornings.
No.
Or at least you being interviewed. New episodes of This American Life air on Sunday afternoons. When Monday finally rolls around, what does it usually look like for you?
Most Mondays, we're prepping stories for the upcoming weeks. And so I'm in edits and stuff, or in meetings with people talking about what we're working on and what should move forward quicker and how things will go. But usually Mondays and Tuesdays are really heavy times to finish stories that'll be on the air that week or the week after, which means that I'll be in these long 2 and 3 hour edits where somebody will play a draft of the story and play the quotes, and a bunch of us will like give notes and adjust it.
Do you look forward to those days?
I don't look forward to those days. No, they're hard days. They're no.
It doesn't get easier?
No. No, like making anything, it's just like you just have to like kind of really, really focus. And some stories are more fun than others, but then at the point where you're really like shaping the story, it's intense. Sometimes it's hard to figure out how to make the thing work. And sometimes like there's subtle things you have to do.
In this illustrated book called Out in the Wire, there's a section about the editing process. And I thought maybe you'd want to read from this passage right here.
Sure. This is a comic book manual that this incredibly talented cartoonist did to explain how we make our show and other shows that do sort of narrative radio journalism do. All right. So in the book, I say, sometimes people give you notes in your piece and you really disagree with the notes. There's something in your piece they really didn't like, and the way they say it to you is really wrong-headed. But I think you still want to notice that they didn't get this part, even if they're not saying it right, especially if it's something that you love. If they didn't get it, it means that you really need to think, wait, what did I do wrong? That they are not loving this the way that I love it. And even if you hate them, I disagree with everything they're saying. What they're saying to you is, you failed. And then she says, which is a good reason to hate them and everything they're saying. And then I say, that of course is true. Me, I really get mad. I get so mad. I feel like, no, this is good. I'm sure it's good. She says, when you have an edit, you get mad about it. I say, I totally get mad. I'm a goddamn baby. And it's not good to show that. I know better. I try to keep it to myself, but I'm a big baby. I totally have a part of me which is like, I know what I'm doing. I'm really good at this. I hired you. You work for me. It's like, don't you know who I am? I produced this show. I don't even say that to anybody. Do you know who I am? I don't usually think it. I am not proud of these feelings.
That parentheses, is that actually in there?
That I don't say that. No, I never have that thought of like, do you know who I am?
You added that now for color.
I did, yeah.
And for clarity.
Well, for clarity, that isn't really a thought I really ever have.
You never have that thought? That you hired all these people?
The only time I have it is when everybody disagrees with me, but then I've learned that if they all disagree with me, I'm wrong. Like there have been times when I've said to people like, well, someday when I get my own radio show, I'll do this story. But that's a hostile thing to say to people who are just trying to make something good. And like really like if all of them, or even doesn't have to be all of them, but if like all the senior people are against me, I'm definitely wrong. And it's really important to understand when you're wrong.
That book came out in 2015, right around the 20-year anniversary of This American Life. Is that still what the notes process looks like for you and for the rest of the contributors?
Usually, honestly, it doesn't get to that point. Usually people have notes and they make a lot of sense and I do them. Like it's only, it's kind of an unusual note where like people, I love something and other people are saying like, no, or even, just like most notes, like we're just making a thing and the stakes are low and, right, this didn't make any sense.
Well, when was the last time the stakes were high?
I mean, it happens a bunch. It happens on stories I pitch and I'm really alone. I mean, it's funny. I just last week was in Israel and the West Bank doing some reporting. And found some things that I really wonder if when I present it to the staff, are people going to be
like what?
I mean, I can tell you something that like a story that I'm not sure how everybody on staff will react that I was doing when I was in Israel on the West Bank. And there's an anthropologist who spent a lot of time in the settlements, spending time with settlers. And he wrote some stuff. And I just thought this is a really inside view of what it's like among the settlers, from the settlers' point of view, when they are expanding their settlements and claiming land that they hadn't claimed. And he knows them well. And the settlers are more complicated and believe things and think things that I really had no idea. Like I read his work and I thought like, oh, my view of the settlers is kind of a cartoon, that they are people who hold a Bible in one hand and a gun in the other, and they believe that this land belongs to the Jews and they're just going to take it and they feel like they have a right to it. And in fact, he documents something that's much more complicated. And so he was kind enough to go with me to one of the places that he studies and introduce me to a couple people who are in his work. And I interviewed them, and it was really like incredibly generous on his part to do this. And it was really interesting. And I know that for all the coverage that we're doing of Israel and Gaza, and we're doing an entire hour about what's going on in the West Bank, mostly, almost all entirely from the Palestinians' point of view. documenting just how much worse and more difficult it's gotten for them since October 7th. So we're doing plenty of stuff about the Palestinian side. And I feel like a lot of my staff will feel like, yes, like let's hear it from the settler side. But I also think that some people on staff will have questions about it.
The younger people?
Not always. Not always.
Does it break around racial lines?
Everybody's an individual, I will say.
Mm-hmm. Well, now it sounds like you are running for office, but it's okay.
It's just it's too inside the office dynamics. And I feel like the people who have questions about it are smart and have good questions. You know what I mean? But that'll be the discussion, for sure. Like, why are we doing this? How are we doing it?
And do you anticipate their questions being, why do we need to have this perspective on the show? What value does it bring to our listeners?
I don't think in this case, because this is something that's not covered in the way that we cover it at all. And I think, and it's exciting that we can take you inside that world in the way that you can on radio, in the way that we do, where you'll get to know people as people. But there have been other stories we've done in the past here in America where stories about people who are just like openly racist, where like as a staff we really had to talk about why do this story at all? Like, why hear from this person at all? And no different stories, we've come down in different ways as a group.
During Trump's first term, This American Life made a concerted effort to represent conservative voices on the show. But by then, you had many listeners writing in to say they had no interest in listening to the other side. You said in a commencement speech back in 2018 that sending some of our stories into this environment is like throwing baby bunnies into a cage of hungry snakes. Come 2025, do you want to update the animal analogy metaphor? And what would it be in 2025?
I mean, honestly, we haven't gotten pushback from our audience, but we also haven't done a tremendous number of stories from the administration's point of view, partly because they don't want to be interviewed. You know what I mean? I would be happy to spend a week with Doge, but Doge isn't making that on offer.
Is this your open invitation to them? Can we send this clip to Doge?
Oh, dude, we've reached out to Doge. We've tried to make this happen. Sure, send this too. Are they big listeners?
Because of the Elizabeth Warren interview, actually, I became a meme for Republicans. It was, so yes.
Since President Trump has taken office a second time, we've done a tremendous amount of reporting, but mostly it's been just documenting the effects that he's having on people.
But the climate of it, do you feel more nervous about? Or not?
I don't.
No.
I don't think about it at all.
You never think about it?
I mean, I thought about it a tiny bit and didn't like it, but I really don't think about it. And this time around, I haven't thought about it at all. Like this time around, I think I and a bunch of people on staff, we feel a tremendous amount of energy because so much is changing so rapidly. It feels like there's so much to document and report on and understand. And also there's so many things being said by the president and his people that are just so deeply untrue and disturbing that it feels like there's just a part of me where I just want to get in there and say like, well, that's not true. And just that itself is incredibly energizing.
About a year ago, This American Life shifted its ad sales from the New York Times to National Public Media, which is the sponsorship subsidiary of NPR and PBS, both of which the Trump administration has begun to attack through an executive order entitled, in all caps, of course, Ending Taxpayer Subsidization of Biased Media, which is my favorite term. As neither NPR nor PBS, the White House has said, presents a fair, accurate, or unbiased portrayal of current events to tax-paying citizens. You yourself started working at NPR at the age of 19, I think it was, back in 1978.
Yes.
Does this attack concern you?
Yes. I mean, there's a bunch of things here. First of all, I should say we are not part of NPR. NPR is the organization that makes Morning Edition and All Things Considered and a bunch of other shows. We're an independent show, and our partners are WBEZ Chicago, which is a local station. But we are not part of NPR. We don't get any federal money at all. So cuts in federal money don't affect our show at all. There's two things going on here. There's the editorial critique of NPR, and there's the money part. The money part, the way it shakes out, is that NPR itself, the national company, gets like 1% of its money from the federal government. And really, most of the money goes to the member stations. And for most stations, it's a tiny amount. It's like 3%, 4%, 5% if you think of stations in a big city like WBUR in Boston or KCRW in Los Angeles. And then it goes up to like 10 or 12, 14% for most stations across the country.
Mm-hmm.
And for those stations, losing that money is not great. If you have a business and you have to, lose 5 to 14% of your budget, like that is not great. But you lay some people off, you do fewer things, and you survive. And hopefully listeners will step up and replace some of the money that was coming from the federal government if and when that goes away. So that's one part of it. That's the financial part. There are stations in places like Alaska, where I was yesterday, and stations in small communities, remote communities, which have like small populations they serve, get much more money from the federal government. They get 30 or 40%. And those are the stations that'll be damaged the most. They serve the fewest people, but those are people who actually need those stations the most. That's where you'll see a more devastating effect. That's the money part. Then there's the branding problem, having the president of the United States call your coverage biased. And it's hard to know what to say to that. I'm not in charge of the editorial policies of NPR, and I don't listen enough to even have an opinion. But NPR, whenever I've heard it, seems like completely mainstream news, just like the way all mainstream news functions. They're on the same news cycle. They overwhelmingly are covering the same things as the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and CBS and NBC. And so they just seem completely embedded in that. And, there might be things on the fringe that are a little different, but most of what NPR does and did when I was there it was a mainstream news source. And for a long time, the right has really had a problem with all of public radio. And partly they don't like the story selection, and partly they don't like the fact that public radio thinks that, or documents the fact that the election wasn't stolen in 2020, which the president doesn't believe. And so calling public radio biased seems like a purely political act. And, I work on a show where we're trying to document things and everything is fact checked. And by fact checkers who call every source and make sure that we're not quoting them out of context. And I don't know how we can be fairer. And we try to get all voices and treat all voices equally. Our show isn't alone. I think that I work among people who are trying to do that.
Is that what concerns you? That you guys have worked so hard to get it right, and yet so many people feel as if it's biased and unfair and not based in fact?
I mean, I honestly don't think about this very much. I think our show is going to be fine just because lots of people listen and we can get advertisers who want to reach those people, and we'll be able to survive, and people seem to want to hear what we're doing. And in that way, I don't worry for our show.
But you guys have had to do layoffs as well.
That's true, but that's changes in the podcast industry. But still, we're a huge staff of over 30 people, making an 1 hour weekly show. We're okay. We're fine. And, as somebody who's worked in public radio all my life, I don't like that smear put all over our work. And it doesn't seem accurate.
When you arrived in Washington, D.C. at the NPR office, it's back in 1978, you went to the office only knowing the name of one employee, a man named Jay Kernis.
Mm-hmm.
When you got there, did you have a job in mind?
No, I had nothing in mind. I had never heard of NPR, but nobody had heard of NPR in 1978. It was a tiny, tiny network that had started I think 5 years before. They didn't have a satellite to distribute their shows. The shows were distributed over phone lines. It was really, really tiny with a tiny audience. And really, I was like a college freshman who just finished my freshman year, and I just wanted a job in the media somewhere. I was going to ad agencies and TV stations and radio stations.
Did you bring tapes with you?
I did.
And did people listen to them right away?
I think somebody did. Yeah. I think I ended up doing stuff in the promos department, and I had made promos for my college station at Northwestern WNUR, clever little funny promos. I wish you put clever in quotes. They thought they were clever. We thought they were clever. I've always had a kind of let's put on a show. I mean, I've talked about this on the radio. Like when I was 12, like I took out books on magic from the public library and decided like I can do that. And then like took out ads in a, like in a weekly
$5 a show.
Yeah. Yeah. And like suddenly started performing shows. I think it's very much the same thing.
Is it weird for you to like look back on that and think, oh, I was confident? Am I rendering that wrong?
No, I was confident enough to like try to get a job. You know what I mean? Like once I was working at NPR, like there are all kinds of things I definitely didn't know how to do, and took me a long time to figure out how to do, and felt like great self-loathing and lack of confidence about. But the part of getting in the door,
that was good.
Yeah.
Where did you feel self-loathing?
I mean, like it took me a decade before like I really understood how to write a radio story. Like I was a good editor from the beginning, but every other skill in radio, like it took me a long time.
You're in college at Brown studying semiotics. You're a production assistant at NPR, and that's around the time you meet Keith Talbot.
Yes.
You said recently that I would have never ended up making radio like I've had without Keith. What door did he open for you?
I mean, Keith was just this incredible, like, inventor, like this very intuitive inventor. Keith was making these shows. This is like the early days of NPR. And Keith had talked his way into a job where he would make these shows. He had a series called Radio Experience. And every hour he did invented the entire format of the show anew. So there was 1 hour. It's funny, I was just talking about this recently, where there was an hour where a back to school special where the narrator is a guy who's sort of leaning into a microphone, who starts by like reading an old like textbook of school supplies from 1917, and then he starts to imagine a PTA meeting going on somewhere. He's like, imagine a PTA meeting. It's happening in the gym, and it smells like school. And he tells you who the speaker at the meeting is going to be. And basically, I mean, we had an actor play the speaker at this made-up PTA meeting. And then the stuff that was the documentary material was we had interviews with people about kids' experience at school. And basically, the thing that held the show together was the narrator would take you into the mind of individual parents who are sitting at this fictional PTA meeting. And then inside their mind, you would hear the interview tape with real people about real stuff that was going on. Like that was a normal month's work for us. And then the next month was like Ocean Hour. And Ocean Hour was like entirely people just talking about people who are really close to the ocean, like people who dive, people who live off the ocean, people like scientists who study the ocean. And each segment was something like that. And then the thing that held it together was two men sitting on a pier, and one of the men is telling the other about this imaginary friend he had when he was a kid, and the friend knew everything about the ocean. That's the narration that holds the whole thing together. And then everything is like super sound design. It was like being with somebody who was just like, had a really vast sense of what could be done as radio. And it totally taught me rules of making something that you can only learn by trying it, and just gave me a sense of the plasticity of radio. And really, like, the thing we do with This American Life is so much narrower. What we do is so tiny and strict. It's like a Mies van der Rohe house compared to like a Dr. Seuss drawing, if you compare it to Keith's work.
So what were the rules of the Dr. Seuss house?
I mean, the rules of the Dr. Seuss house are just like, we're going to interview people and they're going to say stuff to us. And then we're going to just figure out a way to get it across in a way that no one has ever heard. Like, those are the rules, and we're going to create some sort of sound aesthetic with music and sound that's going to take you from place to place. And it was also a very 70s thing where it didn't explain itself to the listener as deeply as we do on our show. It was like an auteur film. Like, you really had to kind of like be there and take it in.
There wasn't a lot of hand-holding.
There was a certain amount of hand-holding, but definitely not the degree to which we do it with our show, where your hand is held entirely every second.
When you're working with Keith, you were notorious for lugging stacks of tape into the edit booth, mm-hmm. and then using a razor blade to cut and splice sequences together until you paired the cuticles of your thumb.
Pairing the cuticles with them was separate from using the razor blade to cut. Like, you had to like use the razor blade to cut the tape. And then you're sitting there with the razor blade. And so, you just take it and you just kind of go around the cuticles of your thumb when you're just trying to think of an idea. Yeah.
An engineer at the time who went by Skip Peasy said we'd come in the next morning and see a trail of blood, drops of blood leading to the bathroom. It sounds metaphysical, but in this case, blood was shed on the tape. That's how he described early
Well, that's very dramatic.
Ira Glass.
Yeah, okay.
It sounds like a horror movie.
It didn't feel like a horror movie. It just felt like staying late and working on something that you're excited about.
Why didn't you clean up the blood?
I didn't know that there was blood. Actually, I didn't know about the blood part. This is the first I'm hearing about that. I didn't realize I was creating a nuisance for my coworkers.
Do you think maybe you wanted them to see that you were bleeding for the work?
No, I think this is more a testament to me just being in my own little world and not noticing things around me that I'm doing.
Your capacity for tunnel vision.
I have a really strong capacity for tunnel vision. If I'm working on something in fact, I've been in relationships where it's been a real issue that I'll be sitting at a table, working on something, and someone will walk over to me and start talking, and it'll take me 2 or 3 sentences to even register that they're there. And so I've had to kind of try to train myself out of that to be a proper social member of the family.
How do you do that? And I'm asking purely for selfish reasons.
How do you train yourself out of it? I mean, it's just it's not easy. You really just try to be more responsive and apologetic. Like the first few sentences, I really don't hear at all. And then when I come to, I try to backpedal quickly.
That tunnel vision, are you proud of that quality?
I'm neither proud of it nor ashamed of it. It simply is what I am.
You're agnostic.
I am agnostic about it. It's way better to be in that state than to be in that kind of thing that happens that I find myself doing that I feel like is much more corrosive, which is you sit down for work and then you realize oh, there's this email I need to respond to. And then you do that. And then you realize, oh, wait, but I was supposed to schedule this thing. And then you do that. And then you lose half an hour, an hour. And time just evaporates. That to me, it seems way worse of a habit than being actually able to focus and lose yourself.
Before you graduated Brown in 1982, I'm curious about your early influences. There's Keith, who you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
There's Joe Frank. But I'm curious, how did your work in semiotics inform your ideas around storytelling?
I think the other big influence on me was Broadway shows, honestly, that I grew up with as a kid and really loved and wanted to. I don't know, there's something, I didn't understand it at the time, but in retrospect, there's a feeling to those shows, the way that they're funny at the beginning and they catch you up in feelings by the end and are about something bigger, the good ones, that I wanted to make in my work. But I didn't even understand that that's what I wanted to do. I only kind of realized in retrospect, oh, that's was the aesthetic that was kind of informing things. But to answer your question about semiotics, really semiotics, it was coming along right at the time I was working with Keith and I was thinking about making stories. And I really wanted to make stories about just kind of everyday life. And it wasn't clear how to do that in a way that would be compelling. And on public radio at the time, there was a kind of a tradition or a thing that they did that when they wanted to go to kind of normal people, everyday life, there was a kind of, I thought, sort of shticky or kitschy or something thing they did where they would go to people in Missoula, Montana. They had a commentator in Missoula, Montana, who's a wonderful lady who would talk about her garden. And there was a kind of homespun.
Wouldn't it begin with a whoosh sound or something like that?
Tinkles of a wind chime kind of thing. It was very and then the people were lovely people. Some of those people actually were quite charming and funny writers. And it also didn't seem to document the way that most people lived. Most of us in our, grew up in a normal suburb. And you know what I mean? Just it didn't seem to be about the current world in a way that was compelling and the dramas in people's lives. And so that's what I wanted to do. It seemed like there was a vast territory there of stuff you could document and make stories about. And then studying semiotics, what was interesting, semiotics in a broad way is just this very pretentious body of theory that describes language and narrative as a kind of conspiracy to hold us in our place in the capitalist order. Okay. That part wasn't the part I was so interested in. What I was interested in, or actually, I did have I did go through a very lefty phase where I did believe all that and held it very closely, and then that kind of wore away. And
is that when you had a ponytail?
I did have a ponytail, but not till later.
Oh.
The part of semiotics that really got to me and spoke to me was that it was a way of looking at movies and stories that was different than the way that you learn in high school or in most literature classes. It was utterly uninterested in the questions that you would get in a regular critique of a work of narrative. It was not interested in what does this say about the author? What does it say about the author's times? What are the themes of the work? It has no interest in that. What semiotics was interested in is how does the work produce pleasure? And there was this one book in particular, I see you brought it here to the interview, by Roland Barthes called S/Z, though everybody in the pretentious program I was in called it SZ. And in that book, he takes apart, I mean, you have it right there. He takes apart a short story by Balzac, and the story's printed in the back. But what he's taking it apart sort of phrase by phrase and sentence by sentence. And what he's interested in is, how does this thing produce pleasure? Like the question that he's interested in is, why do we keep turning the page? What is it doing that's giving us pleasure, that we keep reading and keep going ahead? And also he's interested in this thing that people don't really talk about. He's like, when you get to the end of a story, if it's a really great film or TV episode or book or whatever it is, when you get to the end of a really good one, you have that feeling of like that was so good. He's like, how do you produce that? What's the machinery that produces that? And he identifies 5 things that a story can do. And interestingly, all of them are actionable in an interview-based medium. Like basically, I could take the things that he says you need, and I could, in interviews, get those things, knowing that they would produce stories that would pull you in as a listener and pull you forward, and you'd be stuck and you'd want to hear what happens next. And then at the end, if I could deliver on all of the things, it would feel like, that's so good. It was just like it was like a manual. It was like giving me like a toolkit to use at a time when I really felt like I didn't know how to make something special.
What were the 5 things?
I mean, some of them I almost never use, but the one that we use in This American Life, like the format of This American Life is designed around, is this thing that he calls the proeretic code. And the proeretic code is basically this simple principle that if you have any sequence of actions start, no matter how banal, this thing happens and it leads to this next thing and it leads to this next thing and it leads to this next thing, even if all the things are very ordinary. A man, wakes up and the house seems very quiet, and he walks to the door of the bedroom and just listens for a second, and the house is very quiet. He walks down the stairs, house is very quiet. Like nothing is happening in this story, actually. It's all like super banal. But you feel the forward motion of a story happening, and you can feel the intentionality, and you start to wonder what will happen next. And he says that any sequence of actions that you get going will create the question, where are we going? And that's just incredibly useful. That's one of the reasons why This American Life just starts in motion. You know what I mean? Like the most important thing in those interviews that we do at the beginning of the show that open the show is that just like somebody just starts some sequence of action going. So then before you know it, you're 2 minutes in and you just really go, okay, what's going to happen with this person? And even to start a radio show that way, like when we started This American Life, like all the public radio shows started the way that Fresh Air and All Things Considered start, where there's like a billboard and there's like theme music and they say, coming up this hour. I just felt like that doesn't make you want to hear the show. And especially for our show, where the things you're going to hear are just like, it's hard to even explain like why they're good. That's not going to work for us. And I thought like the thing that's going to be more effective to make you want to hear the show is just get the story started and start people in the dream.
After the break, the dreams of Ira Glass. You get a diploma, 1982. Did your parents give you anything to commemorate the occasion?
Yes, my parents took out an ad in the paper, I think in the Baltimore Sun. My sisters were in on this too, that said like semiotics major wanted, and then I think it listed a bunch of skills, high paying, whatever.
Corporate office seeks semiotics grad for high paying position.
Yeah, no, my parents were not into this path. They were still very much like on the path of like, why aren't you going to medical school?
Did you think it was funny?
I thought it was funny, yeah. Like, I didn't care. I didn't care about the critique, but like, yeah, it was affectionately done. I don't remember if I was bothered or not. I think it was like a lot of stuff that was coming at me from my parents all through my 20s, where they completely disapproved of what I was doing, working at NPR, and just the way I had organized my life. And it did bother me that they disapproved, but at some level I just didn't care and just detached myself from them. I can't remember if this was an example of that, or if this was sort of like, I mean, if I were to imagine myself at that age, I would think like, I could understand that this was a joke and meant nicely and meant with affection, but the underlying feeling of it, I'm sure it would have been a little annoying. I would have had those things together at the same time if I would have imagined myself at that age.
You described your father once as, quote, a stereotypically distant 1960s dad, and your mother, who was a therapist, as either very, very present for us or deeply not present at all.
Yeah, these are the opening sentences with any therapist I start with. Yes, all true.
What did that actually look like?
What do you mean?
Well, hyper presence, I'm being paid attention to profoundly, and then sometimes not so. Was that confusing?
You mean when I was a kid for my mom? Yeah, it was confusing. Yeah, of course. And trained me not to depend on people. Like, I think like my parents meant well, and like, they aren't the kind of parents where I feel like I have real complaints against them. I feel like my parents were like your ordinary level of like, did a good job in some ways, did a bad job in some ways, like had their heart in the right place, like parents, like not tragic in any way. But having a mom like that and a dad like that really trained me not to depend on anybody for anything and to really protect myself emotionally around other people and to view it as my job to manage people, because they both sort of like at some point I realized like, oh, like I have to manage how I deal with them. I mean, to get really real about it, just so in ways it made it really hard for me to feel close in relationships. And I spent years in relationships learning to train myself out of that. And it's the sort of thing like you never totally get rid of your early instincts, but you can totally manage them.
Yeah.
And make yourself be present in the moment. But I'm really old.
Youthful, though.
Like, youthful enough. I just think everybody has their stuff they've had to work on it. For me, that like just being able to be close to somebody in a relationship, it took me a really long time to learn. Like, I feel like my first marriage, I feel like I didn't know it at the beginning. I didn't know how to do it. I think it really made things difficult. I mean, I know it did. It took me a while.
When you were 23 or 24 and you first moved to New York, you were living on the Lower East Side in an apartment on the corner of Rivington and Allen in an illegal sublet that you were paying $145 a month for.
This is all true.
With a bathtub, I think, in the middle of the living room.
Old school Lower East Side apartment tenement.
In that sublet, going to and from work, was it hard to not, I mean, when you say you couldn't depend on people, that seems really hard, given the conditions I just outlined in that apartment and a kid trying to make something work.
My experience of it was not that at all. Like, no, I just trained myself to depend on myself. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna make this work. Like, it just seemed fine. No, I was pretty happy.
So my framing's just completely off.
Yeah, no, no, I was not sad in any way about that. No, like the crappy apartment that smelled like either rats or rat poison. I never figured out which inside. Like it was just like an adventure. It just seemed like, oh, I'm living in New York City and I'm trying to learn to make radio stories better. And, sometimes I get things on the air and like everything seemed fine. Like that was like pretty happy time.
So did you see my framing as kind of like alien-like?
Which is, I see it as like not my experience at all. But wait, why do you see it that way? Why is that your instinct that it would be sad?
Well, candidly, I don't think I could experience the last 7 minutes after what you just shared and not feel a tremendous amount of sadness. Because that's what you were communicating.
I mean, it's interesting. I feel a little like, I think because we're in a format where I'm presenting information to you, like I'm so not living inside the feeling of the thing I'm talking about, that wasn't my experience of it. But that makes sense to me, what you're saying.
There's a gap. There's a distance between the thing you're describing and the actual feeling of that thing.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff with my parents when I was going through it was really hard. Like it was hard for me to feel close to them. And it trained me in a way that it became hard to be close in like intimate relationships. But I also had other things going on that I was excited about and doing, and like always felt like I'm moving forward and I'm doing stuff that I'd never done before. And so like, not just for the purposes of this interview, but in general, I feel like I've just been really lucky to get to do stuff that I like to do. Like most people don't.
Why don't we talk about what you were doing at that time? There's an interview that you did that is often quoted and talked about. In the beginning, the work you make is painful in part because of how mediocre you are. That's
Yes.
basically what the clip is. And
Yeah.
it's not on par with the taste that got you into it. And so I thought, why don't we play a snippet from a piece you did about 7 or 8 years into making radio?
That'd be great.
It's not such a long way from the local grocery store to the international debate over whether sorghum and meat production are causing corn to decline in Latin America.
Okay, so even just that first sentence is like it barely makes any sense. Like it's so compressed. You know what I mean? Like you can barely understand what I'm talking about. But it is kind of high concept. Like, this is me trying to say, like, there's things going on in other countries that we are the beneficiaries of here, standing here in our local grocery store. And this particular story, actually, if I were to do it today, the pitch is good. The pitch is like, in well-meaning ways, USAID goes into all these poor countries and trains farmers to not make subsistence farming their livelihood, but in fact to produce stuff for export to us in our grocery stores. And it drives a lot of them out of business. We accidentally drive a lot of people off the land. And as part of that, we end up with cheaper prices for frozen vegetables. So that's not a bad pitch, but everything I'm doing makes this terrible. If you want to play a little more.
Sure, we'll play a little more.
There's a general air of prosperity here, partly thanks to Mexican imports of U.S. grains, which help boost our farm economy.
Like just notice how I'm performing. I'm just underlining every third word instead of speaking like a normal person.
Mexico is now one of our biggest grain customers, buying $500 million to $1 billion worth every year, including corn to feed its people and sorghum to feed its livestock. This helps cut our own trade deficit and benefits everyone in the U.S. economy. But in Mexico, this policy has led to fewer tortillas for the poor and unappetizing tortillas for everyone else.
When do you think your taste and your talent converged?
I was about 10 years in, and it wasn't on every story, but I started to do stories that had the feeling that I wanted stories to have, where they were chatty and funny, and the people who I was interviewing came through in a three-dimensional way. And there were a couple of turning point stories that where I would make a thing, I'd be like, oh, that one right there, that's the thing I'm shooting for. One early one like that was about a guy who picked up dead animals from the street.
It was called Dead Animal Man.
Yeah, and it really was, and it was made in 3 days. I went out and interviewed him a Wednesday and put it on the air on Saturday. It could be a This American Life story. It's basically a guy who picks up dead animals off the street as part of the D.C. Department of Sanitation. And the thing that's interesting about it is he loves the job. He's very it's easy, and he doesn't mind it. He was a fun person to talk to. There are exchanges where I would just he says something, I'm just that is not true. And then he laughs.
You call him the Grim Reaper in the tape.
Yeah.
And he says, I'm not the Grim Reaper, I'm the Undertaker.
I give him decent disposal, he says. Yeah.
In those early stories, you're 10 years in at that point.
Mm-hmm.
How did you understand what makes a good interview?
Trial and error. I just noticed what had a feeling.
And the feeling was what?
I mean, partly, there's just a feeling that you get if you're in an emotional, real conversation with another person and you feel like they're hearing what you say and you're hearing what they say and you're going back and forth. It's rare to have those conversations in real life. If most of us have one every other day, that would be a ton.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? If you have that kind of conversation with somebody on tape, weirdly, it creates the same feeling in the listener as if they had been in the conversation. And that just became a thing that I started to try to go for. Is try to get to that place and talking to people that it really felt like, oh, we're really hearing each other and talking. And just because that just carries so much feeling to it. And then the other things that make an interview good, things have to be surprising. They have to be telling a story that's interesting. Just it's good if they're funny. It's good if the thing gets emotional. All the normal things you would think.
We're talking around the 30th anniversary of This American Life. But before you make the show, I want to close the loop on this chapter of you finding your voice and making sense of yourself. You have this line in a commencement speech that I've just been replaying in my head all week. And you're telling kids, who are about to leave college. Quote, "You will be stupid. You will worry your parents as I worried mine. You will question your own choices. For many years, I made anywhere from $12,000 to $18,000. My parents, throughout my 20s, when I was working in public radio, they completely opposed everything that I was doing. And there are things I said to my mother, to both of my parents in my 20s, that I still regret. And I don't know if it's because I just turned 30, and so this is on my mind a little bit more, but in those fights, in those heated exchanges, what do you wish you held in?"
I was really judgy of them. And I mean, this is so personal and about them, but like separate from their like not agreeing with the things I was doing in my life, they had like moved into like a really big, beautiful house after my sisters and I moved out because suddenly they had money. And it seemed to me in my 20s that that's what they were about. Like that was what their values were about, was having these things and having these pretty things and having this pretty house in a way that now I just view very differently. Like my mom got cancer not long after that, and that house was real comfort to her, you know? And like, and why shouldn't they have something nice? You know, like I just don't see it the way I did as a kid. And then the thing I regret actually, like more than specific things that happened when we would argue about like what I was doing with my life, like the thing I regret more is just like I completely detached from them. I really just did not have much contact with them. I would go weeks without any contact with them at all. And like they just were not part of my life for years. And in a way that now, like I regret. I don't know. It's like I wasn't getting anything from having contact with them and I cut them off. And I would do it differently if I could now. Like I understand why I did it, but I don't think it was the right way to handle it. And they weren't handling things great on their side, but I know what I did. I remember there was a point where like I was traveling somewhere and my mom was talking to me on the phone and she said, "Go, can you leave the numbers of the places that you'll be?" And I remember it just like enraged me that they would feel protective. I was traveling overseas for the first time. And they're like, "Well, give us the numbers of the places you are just in case, like whatever." And I got off the phone. I felt enraged. And then I had this thought where I thought like, they think that they're my parents. And then I thought like, oh, but I guess they are my parents. Like I totally went through the cycle of like, I was enraged. And then I was like, oh, but then I'm being an idiot. They actually are my parents. And like, okay, I'll give them the numbers. But I noted that like, that thought could occur to me that like, who do they think they are?
But why were you enraged?
Because I just felt like, you're not involved in the story of me. You know, like I'm just like making this on my own and, you know, making things happen on my own. And, you know.
You thought they cared more about the house than you.
I didn't think it that far, but I thought, no, I mean, I knew that it wasn't as simple as that.
Or the lifestyle, whatever it was, that those were the priorities.
I thought that those were their priorities. I mean, I knew that they had some feeling about me. Like, you know, I could see that. Like it wasn't like at the expense of me. That wasn't the math of that. Those were kind of two separate thoughts. I felt judgmental of the choices that they were making in the same way that they were feeling judgmental of the choices I was making. You know what I mean? Like that was sort of my defense back at them, I think, was like they were judgmental about like the idealistic choices I was making. So I was judgmental at the materialistic choices they were making. And that was our standoff.
You know, the math doesn't have to make sense.
Right. Yeah, of course. You know, even the idea that like, you know, your parents are uninvolved in like who you become. You know what I mean? Like you don't have a choice in the ways that they've already shaped you before you walk out the door.
Was there some part of you that felt like you needed the story to go like Ira leaves home and makes it on his own?
The story I was telling myself wasn't a heroic story. It was just, I shouldn't depend on them for anything.
Anyone for anything.
Or anyone for anything, yeah. But I have to say, like, that really serves you well if you're somebody who wants to, like, make stuff in the world. Do you know what I mean? Like, I had this experience at NPR where, like, other people at NPR would, like, do stuff that they didn't like to them and wouldn't give them the jobs they wanted and would do this or that. Like NPR is like a big company, you know what I mean? Like, and news staffers they would do things that like people would get upset about. I always just felt like, dude, NPR doesn't care about us. It's fine. We don't need the NPR to care about us. NPR is here for us to use to get our stuff on the air. Like, and our job is to be cunning and figure out like what levers we pull to get the things on the air that we want to get on the air, which is basically, I think, the attitude you have to have if you're going to make anything. And that's the attitude I had in making the show that I make. I just sort of feel like there's stuff here, like nobody cares if I succeed in the way that I want to succeed. But like, I can see like, oh, if I talk to this person, this will work with their thing and this will work with their thing. And you can just talk enough people into the thing you're doing that you can get stuff done that you want to do. So like really like feeling like nobody's looking out for you at all just creates a mindset where you just are trying to make stuff happen and you understand it's up to you to make it happen. And even in a week-to-week way, making the radio show, you know, just like at some point you just feel like, you know, like here's what we've got to do if we're going to do the thing.
So when you created This American Life in 1995, like the first show was November 17th, having had all this experience at NPR, how did you think about creating a show, creating a space where you would be working with people and you would be cultivating talent? And because it sounds to me like you did try in a way that NPR is a huge company, can't always show up for its employees. It sounds like you guys were pretty entwined when you started the show.
Yes, but NPR wasn't interested in starting the show. So my partner was the local public radio station in Chicago. I was living in Chicago. We raised the money on our own without NPR. We started as like a local show just to like figure out how to make the show for a few months. And then we're like, okay, well, let's get a distributor. Let's get a national distributor. And I went to NPR where I know everybody. I grew up there since I was 19. At this point, I'm 36. And at that point, we were fully funded. We had won the Peabody Award. We were on over 100 stations. And we still couldn't talk NPR into picking up the show. They just didn't get the show.
What did they not get?
I mean, it's funny. The people in the news division who I'd worked with got it. They had a feeling of like, we own this kid. Like, we made him out of nothing. Everything he learned in these hallways, and we own him, and this should be ours too. But the people who ran the kind of like the part of the company that bought new shows and paid for new shows, they just didn't get it. It just sounded too different from other things on public radio. I mean, now it's really hard to remember that because we've been on for public radio for so long. It just sounds like it belongs in public radio. But at the time...
It sounds like it is public radio.
It is public radio, right. But at the time, like I just didn't sound like a host of a national public radio program. Like I was just talking like a person talks. And when we were trying to market the show, in fact, like program directors would say like, you know, Ira's a good reporter, and we've heard him all things considered. Like, but like, are you going to get a real host? And we'd be like, no, this is it. This is all we got.
And thinking about the beginnings of the show, how did you think it was going to work out before it happened? And then how did it really work out?
I mean, how I thought it might work out is that we would get to do this for a few years and we'd be on some stations and like, then who knows? Like maybe we'd stay on the air, but maybe it would just be like a thing that like some people like. And that'll be that. Like our business plan was like, let's try to get on, I think it was 65 stations in the first year. We were so much more successful than we anticipated. And Tori Malatia, who I started the show with, we just thought like, we like this show, but we can't tell if public radio, which seemed very square to us, would like the show. And nobody had made a hit show on public radio in a decade. So it wasn't even clear like if you could even talk your way onto stations and make a hit show happen. And then we really saw the show more as like an indie movie of like, we like this kind of thing. Maybe some other people like this kind of thing. And it'll be good enough that we can like keep it going as a business. Like that's really like about as far as we went. You know, 2-3 years, let's just see what happens. And then like it succeeded at a level so quickly that we never anticipated. And the only thing that I can compare it to is 16 years later, 17 years later, when we started Serial. The thing it took us a year to do, Serial did in like 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Like it took us a year to get to 1 million listeners, and Serial got there in 4 weeks because the internet had happened in between the two.
Right. With that success and your desire to get it right, I have quote after quote here from your colleagues talking about your perfectionist streak, how you'll call late at night asking if this tape works or if this works better. How were you with boundaries? Like, was that something you understood? Because I'm thinking about the kid who was cutting his thumb while he tried to figure out the story, not knowing there was blood trailing to the bathroom. Did that even track to you? Like, was that something you thought about as a manager of a show, as running a show?
I had no boundaries at first. Like, I didn't even understand it. And like, the idea is like, we just work as hard as we can until the thing is as good as it seems like it could possibly be. And I expected that of everybody else. And anybody who wasn't like that, I didn't understand. And that was just the basics of it. And then gradually over time, over years, other people impressed in me that like, that's not really the best way to work with other people. And I believe them. I stand with them and against my 36-year-old naive, never having been a boss self. And I think I was pretty insufferable. I think if you were to talk to some of the original staffers of the show, they would, and I completely support them. I'm sure it was just like, there was a good side to it, there's a bad side to it. The good side of it is like it was an adventure and we were making a thing and it was really fun to make something that nobody ever made and like inventing the thing as we were going. But then the downside of it is like, yeah, just really strong, compulsive, like perfectionistic thing.
What did insufferable Ira look and sound like?
I just think I would get impatient with people when something wasn't made the way that I could see. Like, no. Can't you see? Like, it could be like this. You know, this thing, like, I saw this quote from Michael Cunningham that really got to me because I feel like it really described my experience learning to make things. Michael Cunningham wrote The Hours, and he was quoted in a book. He said, I don't believe in talent. What I believe in is that there's a certain kind of person who just gets very interested in the question in kind of an almost OCD-ish way, how can I make this better? And then they just keep reiterating and making the thing better and better and better. And that was my experience of like learning to make radio. Like, I was not good, but I was very interested in like, how do I make this have more feeling? How do I make this work? How do I make this like be magnetic, you know, like where you can't not listen and like that process. And then once the show got started, it was the same thing. Like, how can we make this better? How can we make this better?
David Remnick said to me once, a lot of what I do is just the mental illness of persistence.
Yeah. But I also feel like it's like a comforting thing to know that most of making something, like there's not like a, I guess there is like a sort of magic when an idea comes into your head that you never had before. But really, like you can just will that into existence just by doing the dumb clerical task of forcing yourself to think through, what do I want the tape to be? Or once you have the tape, which parts are the most exciting to me and what order could I put them in, and just start to like play the game of that. Like it's almost like a clerical thing you're doing that then produces the artistic result.
Yeah. Every week I get the sense that my job is more clerical than anything else. But the thing that I keep coming back to, or the thing that I think may speak to the tendency you're talking about, is an episode called Amusement Park from 2011. And the main character of it is a manager at one of these parks. His name's Cole. And you've said that of all the interviews you've done, there's no character you identify with as much as him.
Yeah.
Why?
I mean, it's interesting. Like he got into working in an amusement park as a kid in the same way that like I was a teenager, he was a teenager. And he really loved the amusement park. Like he loved roller coasters especially. But he really just like loved everything about an amusement park. And so he was in the least glamorous part of the park. He was in the games section. You know, we throw like ring toss and you throw a bean bag at bottles and stuff. It's not the thing that anybody like picks to work in, but that's where he was assigned. And then he just focused everything he had on making that job the most wonderful job you could have. And then soon enough, he's like in charge of that whole section of the park, and he's hiring dozens of teenagers to work for him each summer. And then he pits them in competitions against each other. There's like an entire like bracketed competition where they're competing for who can like get the most people to play their games. And all the kids really get into it. He invents songs to sing them at the beginning of the day. And just he like completely, like the job shapes him and he transforms the job into a thing that's there for his pleasure and the pleasure of others. And I felt like when I looked at that, I just felt like, oh, that was my experience at NPR. Like once I was there, I really loved radio and what they were making and like wanted to know everything about it. But then I also turned my corner of it into my own little fun house based on principles that I invented and then enlisted other people in it. And then he just gets to a point. I mean, he gets to a point where he sort of ages out of running the games thing at an amusement park. And that's the kind of the point at which I meet him in the story, which, fortunately for me, that I'm not in a kind of job where you like, where you like age out like that.
His interest is having fun and getting his colleagues to do more than they probably wanted to do or imagined themselves doing. Mainly because he just wants them to buy in.
Yeah, like there's a point in that story, like I remember, like where everything he's doing is going to like mean more people pay to like play games, and the amusement park will make more money. But to him, money, it's like if you think about the money, it's so small-minded. Like money seems so puny compared to his goal, which is like we're here for our pleasure. All of us, like the people like running the games, the people in the games, and we're going to just organize everything for our pleasure.
Well, why don't we take a listen to that? This is Ira and Cole Lindbergh, the games manager at the Worlds of Fun amusement park, from episode 443 of This American Life.
A couple years ago, we did a thing called Toss the Boss. And basically what happened is that every single day I'd pull a game out of the hat. And if that game was the number one game in the park for that day, then that section would get to throw me in the pond. The pond is not a good-looking pond. It's gross and, it smells. And the deal is that if you are the number one game in the park, you get to throw me in the pond.
So finally one day, the game that he picked from the hat that day tried their hardest and actually became the number one game in the park for the day. And...
Ready? 2, 3.
Of course, they made a video about this because, it's present-day America. And Cole went and told his peers, his colleagues, the guys who run the games departments at the other parks, all about what happened.
I go and I tell the other parks about this, and I showed a picture, like, oh, there's me all soaking wet. And I kind of got laughed at. Like, why would you ever do that? And to me, in my mind, I was just like, why would you not do that? Why would you not want to get people excited about working in the game that they're in? At least they may try. They may do a little bit more. And if I can get a little bit more out of them, we're good. Even if the game only makes a little bit more money.
Also, it's more fun for the kids.
Exactly. It's all about more fun.
Yeah, that's me running my diabolical agenda on this nice man.
Yes, which I feel like at times I've been doing to you in this interview. I'm running my diabolical agenda, which is not that diabolical.
But that's any interview. That's the premise of any interview. The interviewer runs their diabolical agenda.
It's true, although I've tried to lead it with love. I hope that's clear.
But why would that make a difference to me if you're doing it with love? Like, I don't care if you're doing it with love. All I care is that it's good.
I don't think those are mutually exclusive.
They're not.
Because there's a distinction I make that I decided to make when I started the show 9 years ago, which is I came up writing print magazine profiles where you could write any story you wanted to write based on the 30 minutes you got.
Right.
I could manipulate it in any which way. And when I started Talk Easy, I thought, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to ask questions that I think are unseemly or kind of gratuitous or driven by a desire for a headline. I'm going to make a show that tries to show up for people.
Oh, I respect that. I mean, I guess I'm trying to do that too. Like I'm trying to capture people as they are.
Yeah. Not as I want them to be, not framing them in a way that's unfair. I'm trying to create some kind of vision or portrait that feels honest.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
You asked us of Cole, and I'm curious in thinking about 30 years of This American Life. It's something that entertains you making this show. In some ways, has it also suspended you in a childlike state?
100%. Yeah. Yeah, it held me at a certain age, but partly because it takes up so much time. It's almost like I walked into a room at the age of 36, and then I just lived inside that room and didn't get out very much. And so, yeah, it suspended me at a certain point in my life. And I feel like I did have to grow in other ways, like through being married and through ending the marriage and through other relationships. But in certain ways, it just held me at a certain age.
In what ways?
As a boss, I've really changed. As a person who like works with other people, I feel like I really have had to learn to work with other people in a way that I didn't understand at the beginning. And then like in my relationships with my friends and the people I love, like I feel like I really had to learn that. So it didn't suspend change in that way. But there's just something, I think that there's something like over optimistic and a little immature in me that was true at 36 that I still have now.
Do you think that's what's required to make a show like This American Life every Sunday?
I don't know. I suppose somebody else could do it differently. For me, it's been important that I've just been like, I don't know, driven by a kind of optimism of like, oh, we're really going to make a good one this week. You know what I mean? Like, I just have to, like, I don't know, it's just hard to make a show unless you can really like feel excited of like, this one's going to be really good, huh? Like, I feel like at some point during the process, I really need to feel that, or it's just really, I can't do it. And so for me, that's been important.
When the subject of legacy is brought up, you have a tendency to say something like, and you've said this in many interviews, fuck legacy, fuck people of the future, fuck the people who will be alive, having lunch and seeing movies, fuck them, I hate them, I'm not making a radio show for them.
Yes, I stand by that. Yes, yeah, the people of the future who are around after I'm dead, like, I don't want them to perish or something, but like, I'm not making a product for them.
Can This American Life exist without you?
Totally. Yeah. In fact, one of the things that we're doing more of is like more people guest hosting, more people, whatever, with the thought that actually I could just have more space to do reporting. It's really hard to actually ever get out in the field. The fact that I just spent like a week in the West Bank and then hopefully we'll be going down to Louisiana this week to do some more reporting. Like that's all a function of other people can definitely host the show. I work with a bunch of people who are just as well trained and just as good at radio as I am. And just like, yeah, it's a really like wonderful staff.
On your first episode of This American Life, this is November 1995. It was called, I believe, New Beginnings. And in it, fittingly, for Mother's Day, you call up your mom. Here she is.
She's a therapist, and sometimes she gets called, by the papers and stuff.
Romantic love.
Sure.
And people's expectations about relationships. And one of the things I believe is that there are a lot of people who are good at beginnings, but they're not good at middles.
Which means what?
It means that they like the beginning where there's all this idealization and romantic projections, and the other person can be who they think they should be rather than who they are. And when they get to the middle phase...
All right, I'm just going to stop the tape. All right, listen, all of you in the audience right now, let's just agree right now. It's the very beginning of our relation. It's the very beginning of our radio relationship right now. This is our first little radio date. And I just don't want any idealizing on either side, okay? Let's just make eye contact right now. Remember what George Franklin said about the eye contact. No idealizing.
Where there's more of a reality-based relationship, they kind of run away from it because it's not as exciting.
It's interesting that you say that because actually, as we've approached the first show, I've realized that I am much more comfortable with the notion of kind of everyday work-a-day sort of radio work and, being on every week and having pieces on the air. But the notion of saying, like, in a really big way, okay, this is the beginning. It's the beginning, and we're going to have, like, a big beginning, and we're going to make an epic statement, I feel very uncomfortable with. I mean,
so you are good at middles.
I'm better, I think, at middles than at beginnings.
That's good. That's good, because practically all of life is the middle.
A lot of people are good at beginnings, but life is mostly the middle. And you say, I'm actually pretty good at middles. How are you at endings? I mean, some part of you must be thinking about.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Like, how long do I want to keep doing this?
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Like, you do anything over 800 times and you just think, like, okay, this is interesting, but, like, do I want to keep having this week? Like, the week that I had this week, do I want to have this week again next week? Like, that's that feeling of, like, being in suspended animation. Even though the content changes, like, it's the same experience often of going through and doing the edits and making the thing and writing the thing. It's just, like, very, very doing the mix notes. And should the music come in here or here? It's like a similar set of questions over and over. And I totally think about, like, how many years can I do this?
What do you think that is?
I don't know. Like it's funny. I was just talking to Steph about this. I think for now, I still have this feeling of like this time that we're in feels like an especially interesting time to be documenting the massive changes our country seems to be going through. And so this does not seem like a time to quit. This seems like a time where it feels incredibly lucky to be able to like have a tape recorder and be able to write stuff and put it out. It seems really, really interesting. But I could imagine like at some point stopping. I definitely can.
In the beginning, when you had those 80-hour weeks and you were in that Ashland apartment, you would go home and you would look up at the ceiling.
I know what you're about to say. Yeah, like I remember there was a point a couple years into the show of like where I was working every waking minute. I would look at the ceiling and I'd be like, wait, how long do we agree to do this? Like this is like wait, we just do this forever? Like this is just like we don't get to stop?
This is the machine I created and signed up for?
Yeah.
When you look up at the ceiling now, you're in a much nicer home, I presume. What do you think about?
I mean, I appreciate how unusual the situation I and my coworkers are in, that we work in a show where over 3 million people hear it each week and we're fully funded and we get to have our jobs. There's no adult supervision. Nobody tells us you can't do this or you should do that. Like we're our own bosses. Anything we can think to make, we get to make. Like nobody gets this. And I feel very awake to the fact that it's a really hard thing to walk away from. It took a really long time to get to that point. The people I work with are the best in the world at making this kind of thing. And I feel like the last year or 2 or 3 of shows, I feel like these are some of the best years we've ever had. Like just in terms of just the variety of things and the level of reporting and just the feeling and the stories. And I feel like, it's a very hard thing to walk away from. I remember like somebody talked about Dave Letterman stepping down. And like, it's just a weird thing to think like you just would like have this way of talking to the country and then you just be like, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. You know what I mean? Like, I totally understand that. Like, it just is a weird thing to give up. But I'm tired sometimes in a way that I never was before. Like literally just like the repetition of doing the same thing over and over, even if it's a thing you love. You just think like, okay, I'm ready for something new. I don't even know what the something new would be. And I talk about it with the people I love, I'm close to.
Is that a surprising feeling? Being tired?
Oh my God. Yeah, of course. Yeah. And I don't approve of it. I don't. It's like, I don't approve of being tired. I don't approve of that kind of whining I'm just completely against that.
Yeah, you're anti-whining.
Everybody's anti-whining. That's not
That's not true.
I don't want to be weak. It's confusing, that part of it. And then it stops being confusing. Like then I'm out talking to people with the tape recorder and seeing things I've never seen, and people are saying stuff that I couldn't have imagined, they say. And then that's not confusing anymore. And then I feel like, oh my God, this is so fun. This is amazing, you know?
That still thrills you.
You'd have to be dead for that not to thrill you. Like what could be more interesting than to get to see something new and be so on the inside of something new?
In celebration of that, I want to play a clip. This comes from a 2001 piece called Babysitting. Why is that interview your favorite interview you've ever done?
It's my favorite interview because like I went into it, like you go into every interview, not sure what's going to happen. And I go in with a plan. And then in that interview, it just works out so much better than the plan. He is such a special interviewee. Like the story that I thought we were going in for was this like sort of funny, cute story about him and his sister, and they made up a family that they were babysitting for.
To his mother.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Told his mother, that they were babysitting for this family which didn't exist. But in fact, the story comes out to be this very emotional and pretty deep story about how his mother was just an incompetent mother. And sort of like Olivia Soprano, like sort of like had ill will towards him and his sister. And like at some point she sent him off to an orphanage, though he was not an orphan, to live, and which he feels like saved his life. And it just starts off with this like piece of candy premise and then turns into this thing that's so much deeper. And then once we're in the thing, I would just make up questions to ask him, what if you could run into the kids in that family you babysat for today?
The imaginary kids.
The imaginary kids. Like, what are they doing today?
They would be in let's see, there are They would be 56, 57 years old now. I've wondered where they're living, how they're doing.
So where do you picture them?
I picture them doing very well and kind of dull now.
Really?
Yeah. I don't picture them as being terribly interesting. They're more conservative than their parents. But nice, pleasant, good people.
Where do you think they're living?
I'm afraid I think they're living in Florida.
They are. Not too far from where y'all are.
I may run into them in the store.
Usually you ask questions like that of an interviewee, and usually it goes nowhere. And with him, every time I would like make up a weird question like that, he would hit it out of the park and just say something so interesting and surprising and emotional and real. And it just really like loved him. And, you know, it was just such a special experience to do the interview. It's sort of like as an interviewer, you go into a situation and you throw your pitches and then they hit back some of them and they don't hit back others. And this one, he just like everything I threw, he could hit, and it was just the whole interview was so much more vast than I imagined it would be going in. And then coincidentally, Jonathan Goldstein, who hosts Heavyweight, had just come to work at This American Life. This was so long ago. And he was the producer on that interview. And I think it might have been the very first interview he ever sat in on that someone else would have done. So he would just like come to us from the CBC, and he's like new at the show, and it's like the first week or two he's there, and like this is the interview that he sits in on. And I remember we came out of the studio, and he's like, wow, this place is really different than.
Is it always going to be like this?
Kind of. I was like, I told him it will never be like this again. You saw like a completely singular event.
The man said to you, when he went home from the orphanage, his mom asked, "Did you ever think about me when you were up there?" And from that moment on, that was the age of 10, that man said to you, "I never asked her for a thing again." Now, it's impossible for me to not hear you and feel you in that.
Oh, you mean that he drew the same conclusion about his mom that I drew about my parents?
About everyone.
Oh, that's really interesting. I never considered whether the actual content of the story got to me because I related to it. But the fact that he had to conclude through the way that she treated him that he was on his own, and that actually is what made him healthy. Yeah, I totally connect to that. And maybe that was part of the reason why it meant so much to me. But I will say, like, the other part was just the thing that I'm saying to you, which is it was a remarkable experience as an interview it was just the best version of what you want from being an interviewer. You know, I just went in knowing next to nothing, and then it was just so meaningful, everything that he said.
I can't help but think about where we started this conversation, the climate in which we both make work, which seems to have only, gotten worse since that 2018 commencement speech we talked about.
Yes.
Where the informational ecosystem, you said, this will be around for the rest of our lives. That's the most frightening thing to me, that disinformation and misinformation is as popular as ever, that people spread it gleefully and with reckless abandon. That was in 2018.
Yeah, that's before 300,000 people died of misinformation because they didn't believe that the COVID vaccine would help them. Yeah, before we had mass casualties to misinformation.
7 years later, I know you talked about being a hopeful person, an optimistic person about the work, but it seems harder and harder to get the work to reach the people it needs to reach. Where do you see, or how do you see your role in all of this?
I mean, I thought about this a lot. You know, you say like the people the work needs to reach. Like, I don't believe in that exactly. I just think they're the people who like it does reach. You know, I think there's two things that a radio show like ours can do in the environment that we're in, right? Like, we're in an environment where nobody's interested in hearing the facts of something. Nobody's interested in being convinced of anything by something they hear on the radio, but nobody was ever interested in being convinced by something they heard on the radio. Like, nobody ever changed their opinion on anything because they heard something on the radio.
I think maybe once or twice.
Maybe. You know, to answer your question, I think there's two things a show like ours can do. And one is we can point out when something isn't true. And I still think that that's important. And especially in the environment we are in now, where just routinely the president trots out facts that are incorrect to support policies that are brand new. Ukraine started the war with Russia. People on Social Security are, mass numbers of them are getting checks, even though these people are 150 years old. So it's fraud. USAID spent millions of dollars buying condoms for Hamas. Just every policy is justified with things that are untrue. So just like being factual, I think still means something, and it's important.
Still means something to you.
It still means something to me. Yeah, it still feels important to do. But then in addition, I think that there's something that you can do on the radio in the format that we're in, which is that because radio is such an intimate medium, it's like we can introduce you to people who are in the middle of some news event that you've heard of, that one of those news events where like it's just portrayed in such a cartoonish way. And we can say like, no. Like whatever you decide you think about this event, like it's not what the picture you have in your head. It's this other more complicated thing. Like we could just insist on the real world. We can insist on the complicated reality of our world. We can make the world its proper size in people's heads and make what people are going through who are far away from them real to them. That's something you can still do. And so I feel like we've done just so much coverage in the last few years on things like trying to make stories about people who are in the middle of the Gaza war, but not like victim-y, corny, cartoonish, simple stories, but stories where these people just seem like thoughtful people trying to like make decisions about their lives, or just the people who are being, who the Trump administration is trying to kick out of the country for all the reasons that the Trump administration is trying to kick them out. Like, well, let's just get to know them. Like, let's just get right in there with them. Like, I think that's something that radio is suited for. And then people can decide what they think.
I hear you saying that. Are there days that you have a hard time believing that?
Believing what? Believing that that's worth doing? No, to me, it seems worth doing. Like, to me, it feels like unambiguously like I'm interested in doing it. And it's something I feel like, yeah, I'm interested in doing it. And I'm not at a point of questioning it. I'm really not. Maybe I should be. Like, maybe, I feel like you're implying maybe I'm kidding myself. But I feel like if I am kidding myself, like I'm okay with that.
Yeah, it's like a magic trick, but to yourself.
But all magic tricks are to yourself, really. Like if you're doing them right, like if you stand in front of a mirror and make a coin disappear, it looks like it disappears to you.
Well, I thank you for doing magic tricks for, I think, 30 years.
Nice segue. I respect what you just did, and I don't mean to laugh. It's a laughter of recognition, not a laughter of laughter. Yes.
To 30 years. Congratulations.
Thanks so much.
Ira Glass. Have a good one. And that's our show. If you enjoyed today's episode with Ira Glass, be sure to share it on social media, share it with a friend, leave us 5 stars on Spotify, review the show on Apple. All of it really does help us continue making Talk Easy each and every Sunday. Special thanks this week goes to the team at This American Life. I also want to thank Josh Bierman, PJ Vogt, Jacob Weisberg, and our guest today, Ira Glass. If you enjoyed hearing Ira, I'd recommend my talks with David Remnick, Gia Tolentino, and Wesley Morris. To hear those and more Lemonada podcasts, listen on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen. You can also subscribe to Lemonada Premium for all of our bonus content. Just hit the subscribe button on Apple Podcasts or head to lemonadapremium.com. Talk Easy is produced by Caroline Reebok. Our executive producer is Janixa Bravo. Today's talk was edited by Matt Sasaki and mixed by Andrew Vastola. This episode was taped out of CityVox in New York City. Our music comes from Dylan Peck. Our illustrations are by Krisha Shenoy. Photographs today are by Sarah Schneider. Additional research comes from Sharia Aranke and Pierce Harvey. This episode was made in partnership with the good people at Lemonada Media, and I'm Sam Fragoso. Thank you for listening to Talk Easy. I'll see you back here next week with another episode. Until then, stay safe and so long.